I'm Francis Dearnley, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, we look at renewed Russian efforts to retake Kursk before Trump returns to the White House, consider evidence Europe is responding to the threat of an American withdrawal, and assess potential new appointments in the future government in Washington. Then, later, we hear a Ukrainian soldier's euphoric memories of the historic Kharkiv counteroffensive.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
The first duty of my government is security and defence, to make clear our unshakable support of NATO and with our allies towards Ukraine.
Kyiv stands strong.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Tuesday, the 12th of November, 2 years and 268 days since the full-scale invasion began. And today I'm joined here in London by our Associate Editor of Defence, Dominic Nicholls. And over to him first of all, as ever, for the latest news from the battlefield.
Well, thanks, Francis. Let's start in Kursk. We think Vladimir Putin, he's said to have deployed 50,000 Russian and North Korean troops up there in an attempt to take back what land is held by Ukraine, take it back before Donald Trump takes office in January. I think it's January the 20th. General Alexander Syrsky, Ukraine's head of the armed forces, said tens of thousands of enemy soldiers had arrived to expel Kyiv's troops from the enclave that they still have. This has been said to fuel Western fears of a significant escalation to the war with the additional North Korean troops there. I mean, the salient there has been under increased pressure. As you remember, Ukraine moved in on the 6th of August. They took a reasonable chunk of land, and they've been under great pressure since then. Russia pushed conscripts and other forces. We think they took some from Ukraine, mainly down south. We don't think they took many, if any, from the Donbass fight. But it does look like they deployed some forces up to Kursk, but it's not been hugely successful. Ukraine has had to cede some ground, or has had some ground has been taken back from them. But there's still a big old lump of land inside Russia, based around that town of Suja, spreading about 25 k's ish to the north and northwest, and 15 to 20 k's ish south and slightly to the east of Suja. They are still there, though, Ukrainian troops. It's thought that if Russia is able to eject them out of that part of Russia, they might have the momentum to keep going and advance into Ukraine's Sumy region in the northeast of the country. However, Anastasia Blazchik, who's the spokesperson for the 47th Separate Mechanized Brigade of Ukraine, said the situation on the front line in Kursk was difficult but under control. She said yesterday was a dark day for Russian occupation forces after a number of mechanized assaults by Russia had been defeated. They lost double-digit armoured vehicles. A battalion deployed to launch waves of attacks in Kursk was effectively neutralised, she said. Now, there is footage. Ukraine's military has released footage purporting to show Russian tanks being destroyed in Kursk. We can't geolocate it. I've not seen that footage before, but I can't absolutely vouch for where it is. We're running it at the moment on our website. On our live blog, you'll be able to see it yourself. There's a load of BTR-82s, I think, that come to a very explosive end. Now then, into Ukraine, and let's go down to the Donbass, the critical situation developing there or underway there. Let's focus on the Kurkove Reservoir. So this is about 20 k's west of Donetsk city, about the same distance south of the town of Pokrovsk. We've spoken about this area for a couple of weeks now, but we're going to zoom in. So Russian forces have been trying to kind of break out of Donetsk city or that region for months, trying to push northwest towards Pokrovsk. They've not been able to get straight at the city. After an initial nerves/panic, Ukraine did effect a hard stop there on them. However, what they have done, they've had more success. This is Russia had more success on what was there, or what is their left flank, the southwestern flank of that bulge that comes out of Donetsk city. Concurrently, a little bit to the south, Vuhledar, about 40 k's southwest of Donetsk city, that was taken by Russia on October the 1st. And contrary to a lot of expectations at the time, the advance continued. I mean, not at the same rate. It slowed down, but they did continue to push north and a little bit sort of northwest, covering about 2 kilometres a week. So not massive, but 2 kilometres a week for the last 5 or 6 weeks ends up where we are now. So this has resulted in a salient, a bit of territory still held by Ukraine, being increasingly surrounded by Russia's forces, the forces coming out of Volodar to the south and southeast, and these ones, this southwest flank, this left flank of the bulge heading towards Pokrovsk. The bit of land in between is held by Ukraine. So it looks like Ukraine's bulged into, pushed into Russian lines. It's actually the reverse. It's that bulge that's actually becoming encircled to a degree by Russian forces. Now, in this part of Ukraine, you've got the Vovcha River. It runs west to east from Ukrainian territory into Russian-held land and beyond into Donetsk city and so on. Now, pretty much in the middle of the salient is the Kharkiv reservoir, which is on the river. Obviously, it lies west to east itself. It's about 5 kilometres long, hundreds of metres wide. It varies a little bit. It is a sizable body of water. It's so named after the town of Kharkiv, which runs along the south bank of the reservoir. Russian forces have reached the eastern end of that reservoir. It obviously forms a significant obstacle to ground movement. And if you can picture that, so you've got the reservoir, the river running into and out of it. So you've now got effectively Russian forces blocked the eastern end. There's 2 slices of land, 2 pockets of land to the north and to the south still held by Ukraine. Now, yesterday, something happened at the dam on the western end of the reservoir, the dam that's obviously holding the water in place. Ukraine's regional governor, Vadim Filashkin, said Russian forces had attacked the dam after multiple reports of explosions near the village of Stary Dearnley, which is just off the western end of the dam. Now, Mr. Filashkin said this attack potentially threatens residents of settlements on the Vovcha River, both in Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk oblasts. Now, that might be true, but it would also present a major headache to the Ukrainian military if the dam is lost and the area flooded. It would make movement extremely hard. It would probably precipitate or require a withdrawal of whatever Ukrainian forces are left in that area. Now, Ukraine's Kharkiv city military administration head Roman Padun said yesterday the water is flowing out of the dam, but the Ukrainian authorities cannot get close enough to inspect any damage due to constant Russian shelling. Mr. Padun said that there was flooding to the west and southwest of the area. Now, there are images on social media of destroyed dams. All I'll say is please be very careful. There's a lot of incorrect imagery out there. There's a lot of misinformation as well. Some pics that I've seen are of the Kozarovskaya Dam. Don't make me say that again. Which Ukrainian forces destroyed in February 22 to prevent the Russian advance to the north of Kyiv, right at the start of the full-scale invasion. So, there are fake images of dams, some looking worse than others. Just be very, very careful when you're hunting around and you find this stuff. But we will keep you updated as we can, as we get any news that we're able to verify. Now, it's obviously not the first time a critical dam has been hit since the start of the full-scale invasion. You'll remember Russia destroyed the Kakhovka Dam in the Kherson Oblast in June 23. That unleashed massive floods, an environmental humanitarian disaster across southern Ukraine. And we also know Russian forces have damaged the dams and the adjacent hydroelectric power plants in Kyiv and Zaporizhia. Not for a while yet, but it's part of this ongoing mass aerial attack against energy infrastructure. So it looks like this may well be another one. There's next to no tactical advantage for Ukraine by blowing that dam. It would give them, I think, more militarily significant problems than it would aid them. I don't think it was Ukrainian action if indeed this dam has been struck, which it increasingly looks like it was. I think this was a continuation of Russian tactics that we've seen. Now, next one, Russian forces, and I'm not repeating myself from yesterday, but Russian forces suffered their deadliest day since the start of the full-scale invasion for the second day in a row, according to figures released by Kyiv earlier today. So this comes from the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces. They say Russia's troops lost 1,950 men yesterday, so that's killed, wounded. That surpasses the number I gave you yesterday of 1,770. Now, there's no comment from Kyiv or elsewhere about whether or not that includes conscripts and the potentially North Korean soldiers fighting in Kursk Oblast, but that seems to be one of the hotter areas of the front right now, so probably, as I would suggest. I mean, these are phenomenal figures, nearly 2,000 a day, absolutely phenomenal. It will be interesting to see if there's any reaction from North Korea, basically. I doubt it, but maybe China. And just one more for me now, Francis. The European Union says it has supplied Ukraine with more than 980,000 artillery shells and plans to pass the 1 million mark by the end of this year. This comes from Josep Borrell, the EU foreign policy chief. He was speaking yesterday. The EU had said, and Joe Barnes has been really good on this, he's been holding the feet to the fire, the EU had said it would supply 1 million 155mm artillery shells by March of this year, but missed the target, officials at the time saying production capacity was insufficient to meet the target, which is a bit of an understatement. Now, Josep Borrell, speaking to Ukraine's European Pravda media outlet, said, "I know that we made a commitment to reach this level by spring and we failed, but we can do it by the end of the year." For comparison, the US is currently producing about 50,000 155 rounds a month and is on a fairly robust glide path to increase that to 100,000 a month next year. I know I'm mixing my metaphors there. You normally glide and lose altitude and go down. I'm saying you glide up. Anyway, don't worry about that. Just listen to the numbers. Now, production capacity, that was cited by EU officials, the reason I sort of remark on it, it was one of the reasons the Artillery Capability Coalition was set up. You may remember this, worth a quick sort of dive here again. We've talked about this, but not for a little while. There were 8 capability coalitions set up, championed by various nations. The Czech Republic is currently leading on artillery, and they've said recently that 500,000 155 shells will be delivered by the end of this year. So that's separate from the EU stuff. That capability coalition is now, anyway, primarily focused in the short term on buying from the open market. Now, there are, as I said, 8 capability coalitions. A quick skip through them to remind ourselves. The nations I'm going to read out are the lead for them. They're not the sole contributors, but they are the lead nations who then go elsewhere with looking for either cash or capability. But you've got basically fighter jets, the US, Netherlands and Denmark, because they're leading on the F-16 thing. Drones, Britain and Latvia. Air defence, France, Germany. Artillery, Czech Republic, France and the US. Information technology, led by Estonia and Luxembourg. Armoured vehicles, primarily tanks, Germany and Poland. Maritime security, the Brits again and Norway. And demining, Iceland and Lithuania. Just one final word, if I may, Francis, put you on the spot here. News from the EU is good, that they're ramping up their capacity. But, in other defence industrial areas, Europe is not looking so good. So, Francesco, question for you. Multiple launch rocket systems, big whizzy artillery stuff. How many production lines are there in Europe producing? So this is production lines, not factories, because you can have more than one production line in a factory. But how many production lines are there in Europe right now producing multiple launch rocket systems?
I think I can guess, but I'll play along. I don't know, Dom. How many production lines are there in Europe producing multiple launch rocket systems?
Well, that's not a guess. But anyway, the answer is 1. There is 1 production line in Turkey. That's the only place in Europe at the moment producing multiple launch rocket systems. Not the missiles themselves, but the actual vehicles and the launchers. So that ain't great. It's the thin end of the wedge, the long pole in the tent. Pick your metaphor, whatever you like. But, there's not a lot of industrial depth and resilience there in Europe right now. So, capability coalitions, come on then, let's go. EU, yep, pat yourself on the back about the artillery stuff, and then let's get going on all the other stuff. And that's us up to date, Francis.
Well, thanks, Dom. I'm going to pick up right where you left off, because after months of relative inertia, it is beginning to feel like Europe is beginning to act. As you discussed on the podcast yesterday, the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in Paris for Armistice Day with President Macron. They recreated Churchill and de Gaulle's drive around the Arc de Triomphe, which I didn't realise was the last time a UK PM was there on that day. Quite extraordinary. But they've teamed up to make one last-ditch attempt to persuade President Biden to give Storm Shadow permissions, which will allow those weapons to be fired deeper into Russian territory. We don't know yet the result of that, but it seems to be ongoing. Now, meanwhile, according to the Financial Times, to your point, Brussels is immediately changing its spending policies to potentially redirect tens of billions of euros to defence and security. As they write, The policy shift would apply to about a third of the bloc's common budget, or some €392 billion from 21 to 27. Money that is aimed at reducing economic inequality between EU countries. Only about 5% of these so-called cohesion funds have been spent to date, with the biggest beneficiaries, including Poland, Italy and Spain, spending even less. Under existing rules, these funds cannot be used to purchase defence equipment or directly fund the military. But investment in so-called dual-use products, such as drones, is allowed. Capitals of member states will be told that they will now have much more flexibility under the rules to allocate cohesion funds to support their defence industries and military mobility projects, such as reinforcing roads and bridges to allow the safe passage of trucks. Now, that's coming directly from EU officials. That will include permitting funding for boosting the production of weapons and ammunition, though the ban on using EU funds to purchase those weapons will remain. So this is a classic example of massaging the rules to try and make things work in a more favourable fashion for the moment. It will be a move, of course, welcomed by states on the EU's eastern border, where Poland has also broken cover and is saying it will plan to create a new alliance in Europe to support Ukraine now in connection with Trump's return to power. So Donald Tusk, the Polish Prime Minister, has said, and I quote, "We will actively coordinate cooperation with countries that share our views on the geopolitical and transatlantic situation, as well as on the situation in Ukraine. No one wants an escalation of the conflict, but no one will allow Ukraine to weaken or capitulate. This will be a serious threat to Poland and our interests." And I should say, Dom, that there are rumours this new alliance may well include Great Britain, the Nordic countries and the Baltics. I would personally add France as a possible ally if Britain were to join. The conversations that I've had with certain individuals would suggest that the French are inclined to do more, but will only do it if Germany or if Britain were to support them. Now, at last, we are seemingly beginning to see those European countries most directly affected by a possible Russian victory in Ukraine, by which I mean the worst case scenario of an imploded Ukrainian state, but also a state stuck in limbo due to a ceasefire that allows Russia to retain territory, form their own partnerships, as we speculated was possible months ago when the prospect of a Russian breakout looked conceivable. Listeners will recall that there were those briefings that were given to US senators and congressmen, as well as to the French defence fraternity, which led to quite a panic and indeed may have been what fundamentally led to Washington giving those weapons permissions and getting the bills through that were, of course, stuck for so long. Now, you know things are serious when even German leaders are talking very hawkishly. "I'll issue Putin an ultimatum," said the CDU's new leader. "End the war in 24 hours or I'll supply Ukraine with our Taurus missiles." Now, that is, of course, very important given that we are expecting an election in Germany in the coming months, possibly even sooner than that. Say what you want about the UK and the political instability, but at least we can have votes very quickly. There are rumours that this one will have to be delayed in Germany because they haven't got enough paper for the ballots. Quite an extraordinary story, which we covered in our paper last week. But are these manoeuvres, many listeners at home will be asking, enough? Or will the incoming US administration put its foot down and attempt to impose a peace deal that would be unpopular among certain European capitals and would deviate from the commitments previously made to Kyiv? Many would argue that it would be a tragedy indeed if, just at the moment, Europe begins to unite and arm and prepare, and the Russian economy begins to buckle, as there is some evidence of, that Donald Trump saves the Russian cause at the last moment. It is worth remembering that whatever stance is advocated by the White House, the Ukrainians have agency, especially if they believe that Europe will bail them out financially and conceivably militarily. I've long put forward that an underappreciated aspect of this war is how determined senior Ukrainians are, mirroring what is still a majority in the population at large if you look at polling, to fight on. To stress that's not everyone, but it is still a large contingent. And as evidence for that, just look at what Zelensky was saying over the weekend on American television. He said, and I quote, "We aren't ready to give our freedom to this effing terrorist Putin." So there you go, Dom. F-bomb delivers again. Quite extraordinary strong remarks from Zelensky. No suggestion so far from him of a fundamental manoeuvre that will see them willing to give up territory in the name of peace. But what can we divulge then about the current direction of travel on the incoming US administration? The latest speculation is that Trump is planning to tap Florida Congressman Mike Waltz as his national security advisor and to nominate Florida Senator Marco Rubio to be Secretary of State. Now, Rubio is an Iran and China hawk, to put it mildly, who serves on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The Wall Street Journal first reported Trump had Waltz as the national security advisor, and the New York Times first reported that Rubio was the one planning to be nominated for Secretary of State. Now, I'll get into more detail on Rubio in a moment, but Waltz is, I think, particularly interesting. So he's 50 years old, he's a decorated military veteran, NATO critic, and a fundamental China skeptic, and would become, of course, one of the most powerful officials in the White House if he were to take up post. He's also a retired Army Special Forces officer and served on several tours in Afghanistan, the Middle East and Africa. He has been sceptical of US aid to Ukraine and has called on NATO countries to spend more on collective defence. He's also endorsed Trump's claim that the president-elect will be able to end the fighting in Ukraine on day one of the administration. But, and this is the big but here, he is not a diehard isolationist, which will please those who argue that a Republican win could be good for Ukraine if it leads to a difference in philosophy and mentality than that adopted by the Democrats, inserting unpredictability into the proceedings. Now, looking back on the tweets that Waltz has put out over the course of the war, one of them was as follows. "When I visited Kyiv last year, I called on the Biden administration to rush Ukraine the lethal aid they had been requesting for months. They should have had it before Russia invaded, not after. #Stand with Ukraine." Now, he did vote against Ukraine funding in 2024, although that was along with those Republicans who sought to use that vote as leverage to gain concessions on immigration. So did Rubio, who has been more vocal recently on the subject of Ukraine, saying only a few days ago that the war had, quote, reached a stalemate and must be ended. But again, he was initially a very strong supporter of aid for Kyiv, and in September said that when the time comes for a settlement, we hope that there is more leverage on the Ukrainian side than on the Russian side. That really is the goal here in my mind. And let me just repeat that. We hope that when the time comes, there is more leverage on the Ukrainian side. That is the goal in my mind. Now, if that does become the goal in Washington, if these are the appointments that are made, that would certainly necessitate an increase in American support in the short term. And who knows what forms that might take and what it could mean for the Russians if Europe stands behind the Americans and indeed is working on filling the gap. That explains why there is more optimism than one might expect in some, and I emphasise that word, some quarters at Trump's victory, despite all the risks that we have talked about. So who knows what the direction of travel is going to be. But Dom, you were listening to that, and of course you were in Prague talking to all sorts of bigwigs there, between numerous pints of Pilsner, no doubt. What are your thoughts on where we are at this moment and Europe potentially being more involved?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I suppose the short answer is I don't know what I think about it yet. As I said yesterday when I was chatting with Venetia, when it comes to NATO, the effect of Donald Trump was to energise the alliance, get more cash in there, point some fingers. I mean, you got a feel for the the Montenegrin president who was barged out the way at that summit. Was it Montenegro or North Macedonia? I think it was Montenegro. Anyway, but more money went in. We've now, as I described yesterday, this idea that 2/3 of NATO members, of the 32 members, now pay over 2%. That might be literally true now. It's been somewhat inflated by short-term cash injections, which might not be there in a few years' time. But it's energised the debate and that goes hand in hand with the defence industrial debate. Again, as we spoke about yesterday, how do you keep the US close to Europe? Do you try and buy more US kit, in which case you might decimate the European defence capability industrial base? Or do you say, right, Europe will take responsibility for more of its own security and develop its own industrial base, and thereby maybe shove out some of the big US primes? What's going to go down better? But it's energized the debate. And if Kamala Harris had won, I don't think some of these conversations would have quite the firecrackers under them that they now have. As which way it goes, there's so many. The punditry is out there saying, oh, he's going to do this, he's going to do that. We simply don't know. We absolutely do not know. But the one thing we do know is that it's a changed strategic situation this time around. Trump 2. In Trump 1, Ukraine, Russia on the horizon, China was a foe and a friend and a buddy and all that kind of stuff. Well, this time it doesn't take enormous amount of intellectual horsepower to join the dots between Russia, China, North Korea and Iran, and to point out that their closeness is a direct challenge to US interests, I would say. And therefore, Trump may well decide that he wants to take this head on and wants to ensure that the next century, or whatever it's going to be, is not dominated by that kind of axis. And he does want the dollar, for example, to remain the global reserve currency and not the renminbi. And to those that say, well, it's not up to the US to be the global policeman, so fine, okay, if you don't want to be the global policeman, the flip side of that coin is the expression leader of the free world. Now, if you don't want to be leader of the free world and you don't want the dollar to be the US global reserve currency, fine, retreat to your shores, America first, just do what you look inwards, whatever you like. I don't think that history would be kind to that view from a president and a party, and I don't think that's what they will do, to be perfectly honest. The counter to that is if you do want to maintain this level of interest/influence in the world, that comes with certain responsibilities. Where does that start? Well, breaking apart this quad, North Korea, Iran, China, Russia, and what they're getting up to, and the challenges to the established rules and behaviour, the post-Second World War settlement. And when Russia, one of the points that came out loudly from this weekend's Prague Defence Conference, this idea, what's called the post-Second World War settlement, the international rules-based order that China and especially Russia would like to say, oh, it's all a Western construct and it was all built by them and we didn't get a say and it's just built to suit them. That's rubbish. They were there at the start, as you'll remember. Have a look at the history. Francis, you could let us know. I'm sure you could give us the history lesson again. But, China and Russia were there. They crafted the rules-based international order post-Second World War along with Western allies. So they got their fingerprints all over it from the start. So for them to now say we need to change it all, it's their self-interest. Now, countries are allowed to have their own self-interest, but when you club together with authoritarian, murderous regimes that seek to promote their self-interest by breaking rules, killing people, invading sovereign countries, I think maybe that's the time to say, no, that's not healthy competition. You've crossed a line. Me old mucker. A long answer to a short question. I don't know. Nobody knows what Trump's going to do, but the geopolitical strategic situation has definitely changed now in Trump 2, the era of Trump 2, rather than Trump 1. So just saying, oh, he'll be as hostile to NATO as he was last time and to being involved in the world, I don't think that's fair. And back to my very first point, even though he was quite hostile to NATO, look what NATO did. Look how NATO responded to his gently warming bottom spankings. I think I better draw stumps there.
Yeah. Now, of course, none of that excuses the failure of Europe to prepare for this outcome. But you're right, it has injected some vitality into the proceedings. And I think as well, it is worth bearing in mind that when we talk about America first, that there is a very strong argument from an American first perspective that you want to be the foremost power in the world because a strong global economy benefits the United States, given that it is at the beating heart and beating centre of that. It's a point that's rarely made, but is also, I think, very important to that kind of way of thinking. Now, Dom, delighted to be joined in the studio by a very special guest. I will let you explain all. Dom Nicholls.
Well, thanks, Francis. I'm very pleased to say that we're now joined by Ukrainian officer Rustem. I won't go any further. I won't give your surname for personal security reasons, but Rustem is the executive officer of the UAV battalion known as Achilles, UAV battalion of the 92nd Assault Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Rustem, very warm welcome to the Telegraph and to Ukraine, the latest. Please, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and with as much information as you're happy under your own personal security. Could you talk to us about your rank, the scope of your command, of your appointment, and any locations you've been involved in at the moment and since the start of the full-scale invasion?
My name is Rustam. Right now I'm lieutenant responsible for planning, executing actions performed by our battalion, set up processes related to everything, logistics, execution operations, even sometimes training resources on. So usually our executive officer is somebody who is responsible for everything, including documentation. That's a separated part of our job. Before war, I worked in IT. I was a CTO of not big IT company that our business was outsourcing software development.
And so when did you join the army?
I joined first day.
February the 24th, 2022?
Yeah, absolutely. That first day, I understand that I have to go. Said my wife that I should, and it was a not so easy discussion, but she supported me and said yes. At that moment I saw that my small daughter can feel some shame if I will leave home. And this feeling was maybe the biggest motivator of the day. And in a few days I was a gunner of a reconnaissance unit, just a soldier, and started my new life in the Ukrainian army.
Before we talk about the role of the UAV battalion, drone battalion, just on that point you make there, you say that you felt that your daughter would have been ashamed of you if you had not gone to fight. Do you think that's a feeling that is experienced by many people who have joined up?
Actually, I talked with a lot of people, and almost all of them have absolutely different motivations. Sometimes it's really interesting to hear why they decided to go the not really safe place. But each person has their own reason, and sometimes it's really, really personal.
And do you feel that your personal motivation is as strong today, 2.5 years into this phase of the war, but 2.5 years since the full-scale invasion, as it was on that first day?
Right now, it's maybe even more stronger. I lost friends on this war. I have my personal bill to our enemies, and I will force them to pay for highest price that I can set,
Now, we were speaking earlier on, and you mentioned that before your current mission and location, you were involved in the defence of Kyiv, the defence of Kharkiv, the counteroffensive in Kharkiv,
yes,
and Bakhmut. If I could just talk about the counteroffensive in Kharkiv region, can you describe for us how that felt? Because we were watching it here and reporting on it. This crazy dash, what was it, 70 kilometres in about 3 or 4
Even
days? More, where we were saying that there was nothing to stop you apart from geography and then the risk that the Ukrainian armed forces were willing to take of overextending themselves. Can you describe for us the euphoria a soldier feels at that moment of being able to go forward against the enemy after months of being on the defensive and all the horrors that had started to emerge in late 2022. I was in Bucha in summer 2022, just as the mass graves of civilians were starting to become discovered. So in the sort of September of that year, with this crazy dash in the northeast of the country, how did that feel as a soldier?
It was incredible, I would say. So absolutely, that's the feeling I all the time waiting and would like to feel again. It's motivated, it's forced you to do everything's impossible. So you understand that you can do anything. You should understand, that time we are staying, we thought that our enemy is so powerful, it's a nuclear country, so nobody can do with them. And one day we get an order and they said us, guys, you can go and you may do this and you will. Forward. And we did this. So it's absolutely incredible situation.
And why did you stop? The unit you were part of at the time, what caused you to stop?
Actually, all the time it's a complex of reasons. It's a geography, it's possibilities of units to move so long distance. It's enemy who one day started stopping us on some place. They, for the time until we are going forward, have a chance to gather some reserves to set up a defense line on some place. So the complex reasons. And of course, it's a weapon. So till the day that we stopped, we already didn't have enough shells, didn't have enough cartridges. So all this war we just facing with the same situation when we have to decide, will we shot one more time or not? So, and I don't know even how to describe this feeling when you should decide what is more important, the life of your friend or one or two more shells that we can shot. Don't want anybody to make such comparison and make such decision.
I can imagine that there would have been people wanting to keep going and potentially overextend. I don't think you did overextend because you would have been forced back. So it probably sounds to a military analyst, I think, assessing that situation and that counteroffensive, that you stopped at the right place and the right time, probably. It might be one of a number of correct answers, but it seems as if it wasn't a wrong answer. The line has been held.
Yeah, that's maybe a question to general, not to lieutenant, but in my personal opinion, it would be much better if we are a few kilometers more. So there are much more comfortable place to stay would be there. So that place where when we stop have several disadvantages, I would say.
Now that decision or that choice, that soldier's choice of having to decide when to go forward, when to hold ground, when to cede ground, find another day, etc. You experienced that at first hand subsequently because you were in Bakhmut, as I understand it. Now, as you say, a question for the generals, but General Syrsky has been criticised for holding on to Bakhmut for as long as you did when he was commander of land forces. Some people have said that he stayed for too long and it cost too much before you traded space for time and fell back. Do you agree with that? And what was the experience like in Bakhmut? Do you think you stayed there too long or it was a successful and orderly withdrawal? What's your view?
Maybe again, I will say that I even have no enough information in order to estimate or evaluate the time and to make a right answer. That's maybe that time even journalists and even in London have much more information about things is going comparing with me. That I'm staying with a short distance. Our unit stayed at a short distance of way to Bakhmut around Khromovo village. And keep this road and keep the 2 kilometers of forest. Don't allow enemies to go through it. So that's pretty much it. And this fight was without stop, 24 hours within almost 2 months. And how to estimate what is the right decision, what's not right decision. So, that's for soldiers, it's much more complicated, I believe.
It is, and in many ways more complicated, but in some ways simpler. And the simplest thing is, did you have faith in your chain of command? Did you believe that you were given the orders to hold that 2-kilometre stretch of road and forest? Did you believe in your commanders that was the right decision? You had faith that they were making sensible decisions with the information, which is never going to be complete, but the information they had, were you content to continue that mission for the 2 months?
Yes. My answer, yes. And that I don't think it's possible to go to fight if you don't trust your commander that this task should be completed for sure. So if you don't trust, I don't even imagine a motivation how people and why he will go. There are two things. If you trust your commander, you will go, you will do, and you will win. Otherwise, I don't know, it doesn't work this way.
Turning to your current mission, so the Achilles, the UAV battalion of 92 assault brigade. So I believe you're in the northeast of the country, a drone unit. Can you talk to us about the capabilities you have, the types of drones that you're employing at the moment?
Types, so that's maybe almost all popular stuff that is used and that is really effective. Reconnaissance drones to oversee the battlefield.
Reconnaissance.
I apologize. FPV strike drones, and that big agricultural, almost agricultural ones that Russians called Baba Yaga. That's our main weapon at the moment.
So I think most people are aware of reconnaissance drones and the FPV, the first-person view strike drones, but the Baba Yaga drone is relatively new. What role is that filling?
There are several tasks that performed by such kind of drones. Bombing of enemies' positions. So that's a set up anti-transport mines on the roads where they can move in front of us. And, of course, logistics. You know that not a lot of people here understand in this war that this line, several kilometers around the 0 point, it's a line of total death. It's absolutely impossible to move on the even armored vehicles. Everything would be destroyed there. And in order do not risk your personnel who just sitting on the position or who can bring something needed there, we use drones that move ammunition, medicine, water, everything's needed.
All of that is very heavy, and that's where these bigger drones come into their own. Say, I can't remember the payload exactly, and I don't expect you to tell us here because the Russians are listening. But that you're able to physically lift anti-armor mines, water, ammunition, etc., to a greater degree than you would have had before, without putting people in harm's way.
So we are, of course, the decision, what is needed is a decision of infantry officer who just asks us to bring something. But we can't also use really big drones because it's more complicated to camouflage. It's more vulnerable for weapons of our enemies. And so we have to find a compromise between weight the drone can take and its size. Right now, we have no the best decision, maybe. We are in some research. We are trying different approaches. But the drones that already have, plus minus successfully performs these actions, right?
Now, talking about the men and women under your command, I think it's mostly men, but there are women in your unit?
Yes.
Yep. So the operators, I'd like to talk about the characteristics. What makes a good drone operator? Are the people coming to you, they have specific skill sets? You're an IT engineer before the full-scale invasion. I mean, that to me would sound as if it lends itself to this area where there's great innovation. So do you find people of a more technical nature coming to drone units, or what sort of qualities are you looking for with people who you're seeking to enlist?
In the section, each person has their own specialty. In order to make a fly of one FPV drones required a few persons with the different responsibilities. All of them have different needed skills. One of them, for example, commander of the section, should be a person who can quickly and understandable communicate. He should be able to make decisions on the battlefield, like any commander. Another, his role is a navigator, and so he understands how it works. For pilot, again, that's another skills, like similar to gamers, blah, 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 maybe. But in general, that's easier. Any young person can be pilot. Young person can quite easy and quickly be trained for such new experience.
But I take it that everyone is very close to the zero line, to the front line in old terminology. They've got to be within a few kilometres at most for the radio signal to reach the drone. So everybody is very much in harm's way. So what kind of other qualities do you need in terms of how robust do you need the individual to be? Can they operate for extended periods of time, just with minimal support? How healthy and fit do they have to be? Is this a young person's game, or some of the qualities you've described there don't necessarily seem age dependent?
Absolutely. That's absolutely the same. For any military operation, younger person is better than the old one. So I'm almost 50 already, so even people with my age have possibilities to do something. But yes, you're right. Young people will be better because anyway, they will be on the battlefield within a few days. They will operate with a situation when there is a lot of resources, when they almost all the time under the fire influence from the enemy. So they should be able to provide some assistance for their friends because of injuries or something else. It should be really stable in terms of psychology. Even if somebody from the section is injured, the section should continue work because in some situation enemy is still trying to attack us and their influence can resolve the problem. So their psychology should be really stable to perform really accurate and complicated tasks in the situation when, for example, their friend is injured and required help. Of course, we are providing the needed help, so on and so forth, but you can imagine what feel guys in this case.
And the working routine, I've spoken to other drone pilots I met in Kyiv who were on leave. They were working down in Kherson, and their routine was 3 or 4 weeks on operations in Kherson, and then a week back home in Kyiv, resting and getting ready again. Is that the kind of routine you're working on in your unit, or do you have a different rotation?
No, actually we have no rotation. So our infantry brigade is almost all the time on the battlefield, and maybe in most complicated parts of it. I remember properly for the almost 3 years so far, the brigade wasn't on the first line within 20 days, something like this. But of course, pilots and other guys who are performing actions directly, they're all the time. So they are working a few days, then have a rest in the near line, then make duties on a position.
Sorry, just to go back a stage, did you say for the first year of the full-scale invasion, the 92nd Assault Brigade was only out of contact or out of the line for 20 days?
No, I mean within this period from 22 till 24, just brigade was out of operation for some reasons. It's 20 days. All other time, brigade is fighting.
Wow, that's incredible.
I think so, actually.
Now, in terms of the technology, the drone technology, as I say, it's one of the areas of particular innovation that we've seen in the war, and it's a race like air defence against fighter jets and what have you. There's always the technology leans in one way, and then the other side come up with countermeasures. So drones, anti-drone technology, counter anti-drone technology is always that sort of cat and mouse stepping stone. So in that race, as armoured vehicles are getting more protection against drones, and the drones are becoming more capable in terms of their payloads, they can do more, their endurance, their ability to withstand electronic warfare defences. Where do you say that race currently is? Who has the upper hand at the moment, the drone or the counter-drone technology?
I don't know. We will see. But what I would like to say, you're right. It's a common competition, armor and armor. Per my experience, armor usually wins, right? So I think anyway, of course, electronic warfare is complicated problem, but they also have a lot of restrictions, vulnerabilities, how to set up, how they can influence on us. We are generating new ideas how to prevent this. So it's a fighting, it's a competition of technologies, of approaches, of tactics, of usage. But we will do our best to win in this competition as well.
Now, some months ago, President Zelensky announced that there was going to be a new drone division. I forget the name. Please forgive me, I can't remember the name, but a huge effort linking the military-industrial side of the economy directly into the military to produce more and get things out to the front line earlier. Have you noticed a difference in the last few months? Is this starting to bear fruit? Are you, for example, doing a lot of 3D printing to get drone parts? Are you able to produce these things quicker because the attrition rate, so many are being destroyed? Is this bearing fruit yet, this new drone division?
Actually, there are a lot of changes. So the situation changed all the time. So the government trying to provide us with the needed amount of the equipment, with the needed amount of drones, other things that is needed, like radio stations, satellite connection stations, so on and so forth. A lot of things that is needed, and without them we can't operate. And drones. And situation is better each day, but anyway, it's not enough, critically not enough. You know that the number of drones that use it just one section of battalion per day use it about 50 once.
50?
50. So number of drones, that FPV drones that use it by month by our battalion, it's thousands. I won't say exact number, but you can imagine. It's just one unit. All other units in our brigade uses also. It's also a big number. Hundreds brigades that are fighting, special forces, so on and so forth. All these things, it's millions and millions are needed on a daily basis. Also, we need to keep in mind that all these drones should be changed on a daily basis. So because war dictate new conditions, new requirements to the drones. And drones that worked very well 2 months ago won't work fine today. Even if somebody produced such drones, we will have to refurbish them to allow to be used on the battlefield. The same situation with armor that we installed there. The enemies are thinking how to be protected from our drones. We are thinking how to go through this protection. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes not good, but results that you can see of our work, it's maybe optimistic a bit.
And the threats to your operators, both to the actual vehicle, the air vehicle, the drone, and to the personnel, because obviously the enemy will be looking for your location to try and destroy the people. How are you able to protect your people without producing such an electromagnetic signature that you stick out in the spectrum and it's easy to see where you are?
It's not so easy, and we have some tactics how to hide our guys when they are on the position. Camouflage it, make maybe some not right positions to simulate activities somewhere else, so on and so forth. A lot of different tactics that we use. Maybe it's not a good idea to describe them in detail, but you should understand that it's one of the important questions that it all the time under control, and commanders need responsible commanders just process it, go through and trying to improve.
And you as the executive officer, so you're able to, I guess you're just sort of one pace behind the men and women flying the mission. So you're able to make a judgment call on how much time is devoted to conducting the mission, to how much time in training, how many drones do you use, and therefore you have to accept you're going to lose, just training and innovating. How are you doing that day to day? How are you able to just have that little breath between the white heat of the contact battle and this knowledge that we need to innovate and we need to be fighting again next week and next month and maybe next year? How do you make these calls?
It's maybe strange, but a battalion like us, it's really similar to quite big organization where there are several persons responsible for each direction and working how to improve and make their responsibility. So in the battalion there is the deputy of a commander who is responsible for weapon. It's person really experienced, super pilot, super engineer. He was injured a bit under Bakhmut, and after that he's started to work on the weapons. My friend and Taras worked trying to improve drones and set up a process how to deploy needed ones to the personnel. After each day, after each fly, they getting information about the results, how it was, video stream, distances, coordinates, results, success, not success. They are analyzing this data, come up with the needed changes, then getting the results back, then by cycle. another deputy is for the logistics. He is responsible to set up logistics. Another guy is working on just transportation and vehicles and details related to them. Commanders of companies improving the process, how their guys working on a position, make lessons and learns on a daily basis, how position work, how command center work. On my side, I'm gathering information and on the battalion level. So it's a huge organization. It's 100 persons who are operating on a daily basis in a complicated conditions with a not straightforward process that nobody can teach us how to set up, because nobody do this, and that's clear creativity that we are trying to do in a so strong structure like a army. But we are trying to do this.
And just finally, coming towards the end, are you able to spread those lessons sideways to the other brigades and the other UAV battalions? Are you sharing your knowledge and sharing the battlefield experiences so that there are other people, again, maybe a little bit further back, who are in slower time able to think about, right, where do we need to go? How do we need to do this? How do we need to configure the power or the software or do the uploads and the software updates and what have you? How readily are you able to take lessons from left and right?
It's widely, so we are trying to share the right experience, communicate with guys, neighbors, maybe somebody if have a possibility from the long distance, go to us to share experience. We are trying to visit it, successful, non-successful guys, because we one of the best, I would say the best UAV unit in the army, but anyway we are trying to get an experience from anybody. We are not genius. We just trying to learn lessons on a daily basis, not just our lessons, but if somebody finds something interesting, we trying to get it. Our commander saying, guys, the first thing you shouldn't do, you should be bronze. Like a monument, feel yourself like something incredible and the better than others.
What, you should be humble?
Yep.
Very good. And are you able to share, do you find it a receptive audience when you're here in London speaking to defence officials from the UK and other countries? Are you able to export your lessons learned there, or do you feel, is there a certain arrogance from the West, from NATO, saying, well, you know, we don't need your help? Are you able to, do you find a ready audience for your lessons?
I'm not sure. Sometimes there is a feeling that they don't maybe understand for 100% what's going on. So how up-to-date operations perform, at what complexities, what is the possibilities of our enemy of fire influence, and how to control personnel in this case, how to perform actions. Because it's a completely different situation when your armored vehicles is, influenced by machine gun, or if it's a division of artillery or something like this. It's completely different situation, it's completely different reaction. And even patterns that are used in the infantry units right now are not satisfied to up-to-date requirements. Just imagine, what will do infantry section if started fire influence? Infantry section will go and gather in one point. And in this case, they will appear the good and easy target. And with a high probability, they will be destroyed and killed. So the infantrymen should understand another patterns of behavior on the battlefield. So they should understand how to protect from drones that we will be 100 times in the air. So they should have appropriate trainings get appropriate information how to protect these devices to protect themselves. Maybe personal electronic warfare, maybe some shotguns, I don't know, but I think you'd be a really strong person to use a shotgun against the FPV drones that attacked you. But anyway, it's a new war that character of this war was dramatically changed comparing with the wars that we saw before.
And we started talking today, you said you were motivated partly by being able to look your daughter in the eyes and say you did your you did your bit. Which she's 2.5 years older now. What does she think of her dad?
I don't know. She is thinking that he has the best father ever, I believe.
Correct answer.
Yeah, but in general, there are really complicated life for the child. You know that everything started from COVID, then started this war. So she even haven't the chance to go to school properly within several years. Didn't see father. She can detect what kind of explosion was, so it was a rocket or it was the anti-aircraft system works. So it's maybe not the best experience for anybody.
Rustem, Executive Officer of the Achilles UAV Battalion of the 92nd Assault Brigade, thank you for talking to Ukraine the Latest today.
Thank you.
Let's go to our final thoughts now. Before I turn to Dom, just very quickly, I wanted to read a note from James, a listener who emailed in. And I think James speaks for many by asking or putting forward this view that he does here. So I'll quote from him now. I listened to your interview on Friday with Michael Bonert, who's great, but I felt that he was understating Biden's range of options. He talked about a critical factor being Washington shutting down in December, but that's Congress, not so much the Pentagon, and particularly not if the Commander-in-Chief orders otherwise. Congress has already given Biden all the needs to make big contributions. He can send things from the existing stocks. He could have many planes in Ukrainian hands in Poland in short order. There's no shortage of F-16s. Even people like Elbridge Colby think the US should send a bunch of them because they don't believe that they're useful against China, and cutting their maintenance from the defence budget would help modernise the Air Force. To a fair extent, Biden can send money, which would arrive even faster. Removing all restrictions from Ukrainian use of US equipment and from allied donations to Ukraine would be quicker still. And then James goes on and says, in my view, when Biden doesn't act, it isn't because of Congress, which has throughout already asked him and given him more robust means to act. It's not because of escalation. It's not because of a lack of time. It's just Biden's thirst for appeasement. Now, whatever one thinks of Biden's approach, and listeners will have formed their own opinion over the past 3 years, on this question of timing and what Biden is actually able to do, it is true that there are more options perhaps available. But when Michael was saying in Friday's episode, which I highly recommend listening to, by the way, if you didn't, the fact is that, yes, it's Congress that leaves, but fundamentally, many, many people, almost all DC government civilians, take half of December off, and also the timings that would be required for certain of these initiatives would take far longer than the 2 months that Biden has. And so I think when we just reflect on the action and the room for manoeuvre, we'd love to think, that Biden could just suddenly do whatever he likes and that all it's needed is for somebody to slide the right thing across his desk. The reality is the options are probably quite limited in the timescale. There are things, very important things, hence why Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron are trying to act right now and persuading them to give storm shadows. But it's not really as transformative potentially as many people would argue. But as I say, I recommend Friday's episode for those who are interested in that subject. Dom, where do you want to leave our listeners with?
I want to leave listeners searching for dumplings in China. Let me explain. Interesting story from the foreign pages. I think it's worth just not overdoing it, but keeping our eye on. So, over the weekend, more than 100,000 Chinese students, ding, 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 come back to that, students, important, took part in a 37-mile nighttime bike ride on a quest for soup dumplings. So, they call themselves the Night Riding Army. They had a huge turnout, big flash mob. They've been riding for months, been building in numbers, 100,000 at the weekend. So this all started, apparently, this craze of young Chinese people trying to travel as cheaply as possible in the face of high youth unemployment and pretty poor job prospects. So this started in June. It was called a soft protest movement, right? So first alarm bells going for the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. They don't like protests. They don't like movements. So in June, 4 female college students chronicled their ride on social media to go and try and find, and apologies if I'm going to get this wrong, guantang bao, a type of soup dumpling. So Chinese media got hold of this and they thought it was quite fun. They initially characterised the trend as, quote, a symbol of youthful energy and the joy of shared experiences. However, it's all changed as it's got bigger. There's now the three main bike-sharing platforms, Hello Bike, Didi Bike and Mobike, have said that students will be locked out of the bike if they're taken out of designated zones. Now, okay, fine, fair enough. That might be a commercial thing. You're not allowed to take the bikes everywhere, but it's just, a sign of creeping regulation. And then over the weekend, authorities in Sangju and Kaifeng closed off some of the main cycling lanes between the two cities. Right, so cycling lanes. They'd cited it was traffic chaos. They'd brought a highway to a standstill, so they're closing cycle lanes. So that's not about traffic. So this idea, maybe I'm overdoing it here, I don't know, but them saying, oh no, you're causing traffic chaos. Well, if they're on the cycle lanes, that's where they're supposed to be. Anyway, there are increasing signs Chinese authorities are now clamping down on this activity, and I think it's because what the one-party state fears most is society self-organising and responding to any idea or mass movement that has not come from the party. Just as when the party murdered hundreds, if not thousands, we still don't know, in 1989 Tiananmen Square, they are terrified of students and young people protesting because, and Francis, you'll remember it maybe, in your youth, the energy, the ideas, the vitality, the refusal to toe the line, to take on new ideas and run with them or cycle with them, the party is terrified of that. And now this might come from a genuine grievance about unemployment and jobs. It's now morphed into dumplings. They do not want this. The Chinese Communist Party authorities do not want this to keep going, to get bigger, to morph back into protests about youth unemployment, job prospects, because who knows where it could end. It might even get into freedom of speech. But this idea that they're not in control of organising these events, these hundreds of thousands of people turning up, that will terrify them. So let's just keep an eye on that. I don't think it's going to be allowed to continue for much longer. There will be all sorts of chat about, oh no, it's a danger to the roads, we can't allow it because it's causing traffic chaos, which is why I think it was so interesting they closed the cycle lanes. But anyway, I don't think I'm overdoing it. I don't think I'm seeing reds under the beds. I think this is genuinely something to keep an eye on and something that will get President 11 a little bit rattled if it carries on.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Nicholls. To support our work and to stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get your first 3 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Or sign up to Dispatches, our foreign affairs newsletter, bringing stories from our award-winning foreign correspondents straight to your inbox. We also have a Ukraine live blog on our website where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each weekday on Twitter Spaces. Follow The Telegraph on Twitter so that you don't miss it. To our listeners on YouTube, please note that due to issues beyond our control, there is sometimes a delay between broadcast and upload. So if you want to hear Ukraine the Latest as soon as it is released, do please refer to podcast apps. If you appreciated this podcast, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review, as it helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. As the disinformation war continues, we're relying on your support more than ever. You can get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We do continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on Twitter, now X. You can find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you're listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest was today produced by Phil Atkins. Executive producers are Louisa Wells and David Nicholls.